Welcome to the Moviegoer Society podcast brought to you by Nerdtropolis. I'm your host, Sean Tajapur, the mayor of Nerdtropolis. And joining me is my co-host, Drew Munhausen, the professional media and movie mastermind. What's going on, Drew?
Hey, not much, just had a good, somewhat relaxing weekend, but ready to talk about movies as always.
Yeah, I see you got the Need for Speed behind you.
I do. That's in reference to Gran Turismo, which of course we'll be talking about soon.
Yeah, and I see a GTR right in the front, and that's actually what I'm driving right now is a blue GTR 2023 that Nissan has sent me. I think what day am I? Thursday I got it. So, I mean, I've been driving a few days, and it's been a blast. Like, I gotta say, about 560 horsepower under that thing, all-wheel drive. That is a track car ready for the streets. So I'll be doing a fun review on my automotive site, West Houston Muscle. But that's been fun. I mean, I wish I had it for when we got to see it and kind of did a full circle thing, but I'm enjoying it now.
This is why we have you here when talking about Gran Turismo and talking about specifics of cars, because a lot of the stats that you just said about that car is like speaking a different language to me. I am just not a car person in that way. So yeah, Sean, that's what we got you here for.
Exactly. And in this podcast, we dive into the world of cinema, exploring everything from beloved classics to latest blockbusters. And we're now on episode 5, and we're diving into 2 films: The Last Voyage of the Demeter, now in theaters, and Gran Turismo, which got a shift in its schedule, now coming to theaters on August 25th. But Drew, before we get into them, I want to make sure everyone can connect with us online. You can find me almost on every social media platform at Sean Taj. And don't forget to visit nerdtropolis.com for your daily dose of movie news, reviews, interviews, and trailers. And Drew, where can they find you when you're not contributing to Nerdtropolis?
You can find me on X, formerly known as Twitter, at Drew Munhausen, but also on Letterboxd. I like to use Letterboxd a lot. I'm on there all the time, logging what I'm watching, at Drew Munhausen on Letterboxd. And then also over weekly at Fresh Out the Podcast, where we talk about, in addition to movies, we talk about video games and TV shows and all the cool things we're enjoying from week to week. So, yeah, that's it for me.
Yeah, and also don't forget to catch up on any episodes of the Moviegoer Society podcast that you haven't watched. We're on episode 5 now, so go back and check out the first few episodes. And you can tune into my podcast that I do, Nerdtropolis Mayor Presents. It's on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and on our Nerdtropolis YouTube channel. And that's where I kind of talk to actors, directors, producers. I have a great one with Alex Winder, if you know, from Bill and Ted. It's a new documentary out. It speaks to Orlando Jones. So definitely check that out. But I think now it's time to jump on board to The Last Voyage of the Demeter. So Drew, if you want to take on that one, go for it.
Yeah, I can start. So The Last Voyage of the Demeter is based on this. It's kind of interesting for all the Dracula heads out there. So it's based on the Captain's Log, which I believe is a chapter from Bram Stoker's Dracula. So this is like a short chapter from the book that they have now made into an entire feature on its own, which I feel like we're seeing this kind of thing happen more and more often now. And, to varying degrees of success. And, we got to see this one together, and it's one of those movies where I think your mileage may vary depending on maybe how big of a Dracula fan you are, how big of a horror fan you are. I personally was underwhelmed by this one, I'm sorry to say. But when you and I finished screening this movie, it's worth noting there's a few people around us that were giving very positive reactions to this movie, and I'm glad that they were able to enjoy it. I kept my mouth shut because I didn't want to
we didn't want to diminish the movie from what they experienced, and they're big time horror fans and movie aficionados. Like they know their stuff, and they definitely loved it.
And to give a little bit of a plot here, I guess the Demeter is a ship, and they are leaving from Bulgaria and going to London and taking cargo. And so at the beginning, when they're loading the cargo onto the ship, there's some funny things going on. It's pretty clear that Dracula is probably in one of these boxes. And sure enough, as soon as the Demeter is out in the ocean, things start to happen, particularly at nighttime. And I actually thought that the beginning of this movie, I was kind of on board. I'm like, okay, I'm liking the ramp up here. I'm liking the boat setting. There were some interesting performances, like Corey Hawkins is the lead, and I like him a lot. But Liam Cunningham, who people will know as Sir Davos from Game of Thrones, is in this as the captain, and he just has like this gravitas and the voice, and it's all there. And he's somebody that I really liked in Game of Thrones, and I'd want to see him in as many things as possible. And so seeing him here was a joy. And then of course, when the Dracula attacks start happening, the design for Dracula is really fascinating because he's you can see him kind of strengthening as the movie goes on, and he starts off very frail and weak. And as he gets stronger, gets a little bit more details put into him, and with flight and things like that. But he's very bat-like in his quote human form.
It kind of reminds me of Man-Bat from Batman, and like he starts off really scrawny and kind of builds himself up with obviously his feedings. And I have to say, like, I was getting vibes of like Gollum at times. Even Dobby,
good comparison.
Even Dobby the house elf for some reason kept popping up. And then like the MCU's Abomination, like kind of like just the ears and the shape of the head sometimes. I just got this like hybrid design. And I read it's a practical suit they use, and then they enhanced it with CGI on top of it. And I just think the CGI kind of came off sometimes as a little wonky, and they kind of should have pulled away from that.
Yeah, the actor that plays Dracula, his name's Javier Botet, and I was actually reading about him because he does a lot of creature roles, and he has it's called Marfan syndrome, but basically it causes him to have like really long limbs and joints and long fingers, and so he has been able to utilize that to play all kinds of great creepy horror villains. Some other things he's been in include like It Chapter 2. He was the creepy like hobo and the witch from the second one, and he's in Insidious: The Last Key is Keyface. In the Slender Man movie, he was Slender Man. In The Conjuring 2, he was the Crooked Man. So like a lot of some of the better visual, and practical horror villains of recent years have been Javier Botet. And so that works really well in this for the Dracula design. My big thing with this movie is that it starts off showing the abandoned Demeter. And then it's a flashback, right? So it's all building up to that point. So you kind of already know how the movie ends. And so the tension, there just wasn't that much tension for me, I think, is the big problem. And while the Dracula on a boat premise is interesting, and there are some cool parts of that, just the actual scares are too few and far between for me. And there was a lot of talking in between, which, not to sound too pedestrian about it, but I thought it just kind of lagged a little bit too much in between the scares, and the movie is long. It's almost 2 hours long. Did you
get scared by chance, Drew, at any point?
So there's a lot of jump scares attempts in this movie. I think that most of the jump scares are pretty well telegraphed beforehand, but I maybe jumped like 2 to 3 times. A few of the jump scares got me. A few of them were unsuccessful. So like from that standpoint, I jumped at some of the jump scares, but did I sit there with an overwhelming feel of dread or anything during the movie? No, not at all.
Same here. I didn't have any genuine fright or terror, and I get scared easily, Drew. Like,
I was going to say, you've always been transparent about, that you get scared in scary movies. You're an easy mark for these things.
I don't do scary movies very well. I mean, they freak me out. I think The Boogeyman scared me, and that was just a PG-13 movie, and that freaked me out. This one's rated R, and I think it's really only rated R because bloodshed is shown. But other than that, scare factor, I don't think it even deserves a rated R rating.
Yeah, it's just the jump scares. I don't want to say that they're cheap jump scares in this one, because there's, I think you go into this one expecting there to be jump scares, but I only found a few of them to be successful. But I'm glad that it didn't try to over rely on jump scares. It does try to set an atmosphere that works at times. And any time Dracula was on screen, I was riveted. Like I'm here for Dracula. So anytime we had Dracula, I was good. But just sometimes the in between Dracula parts lagged a little bit too long for me, and I'd start to lose interest until it would bring me back in. And again, for a movie that's 2 hours long, I just feel like it would have been pretty easy to cut out 20 minutes of this and just make it really flow. And I actually probably would have liked it a lot more if the pacing was just a bit better. So yeah, I'm just mixed on it. Like I think that there's some good here, but you know, you just got to wait too long to get to some of it.
Yeah, there's a lot that we expected, but I thought it would be best if they used the tension between the shipmates and maybe have them kind of go at each other because they really don't. You know, tensions don't really boil between any of the shipmates to full extent. It does mildly, but like not to the full extent where, you know, they turn on each other. So it kind of just seems like there was just them trying to figure out what's this creature on board. And then some of the things they decided to do made no sense to me. I'm not sure if it's in that captain's log in the book. It's just some of the things did not make sense to me at all. And the fact in the beginning they showed already the shipwrecked, I was like, oh, that's kind of a strange way to start the movie. You know, you don't know how it's going to crash, but it just does. And I really wanted more from David Dastmalchian. I'm a big fan of his, and I felt like he was just okay in this movie. Didn't really give any breakout performances or anything else from it. Corey Hawkins, I think, steals the movie. To my surprise, I mean, he does a really good job.
Yeah, I also think that he's very good, and you know, he made an impression on me back like in The Heights. I think he's good in that too, and the Tragedy of Macbeth. He's great, and so I've been waiting for him to get some bigger roles, and it's great that he's the lead here, but I think it's just the material doesn't serve him super well, unfortunately. And yeah, you know, it's the other thing too. You kind of started to talk about the confusion. Just when it comes to vampires, I get it. I get vampires. They come out at night. They drink your blood. They can turn you into a vampire, so on and so forth. But sometimes the rules get a little weird in this because, you know, there are times where he bites people and then they kind of start to serve him. But then at other times he bites them and they die. And it's like kind of unclear as to what exactly is happening here. But you know, that's the type of stuff where I could look past. I don't get hung up on those details. Like I don't need it spelled out to me. I get it. Vampires, whatever. They have weird powers. I think that was another just odd thing for me.
Right. I kind of want to get more into the lore of Dracula or the Dracula they wanted to present to us, because I feel like every type of Dracula we've seen, or even vampires, there's always been different lores, different powers, where they came from, and just how they survive and what their victims do or become. And that's the confusion too. What happens to the victims? Like you said, like what happens to them? So that was also a problem. But it starts off strong. And it gets pretty good with some of the action. I really like the action parts of it, and it's really cool to see Dracula on a ship. We'd never seen that before.
Yeah, I think that was probably like it really does kind of feel like that's what got the movie made. Is somebody's like Dracula on a boat, and so, you know, studio exec said yes, let's do it. But yeah, it's been a tough year for Dracula in media. A tough couple of years in movies in particular. You know, Renfield came out earlier this year with Nicolas Cage as Dracula, which was a movie I actually thought was kind of fun, but it didn't perform very well. So that's too bad. And then, you know, I actually didn't see Dracula Untold, which was, I believe, the Luke Evans Dracula movie they made a few years back. So I don't know. It's like a struggle to get people into the theaters to see vampires and see Dracula, unless they're vampires from Twilight, or I know that What We Do in the Shadows, the TV show is successful, but yeah, I'm not on the big screen much lately.
Right. And I saw Dracula Untold. I don't know what streaming service. One of them has Dracula Untold. I watched it. I really didn't like it too much, but I liked the story they were trying to tell. It was kind of extended, a lot of lore about it. So that's what I really liked that they were exploring. So I'm not sure. Dracula needs the proper respect somehow. I'm not sure when he's going to get it. Hopefully something good. I will tell you this. I did like where this movie ended and what it teased at. And it seemed like it teased a better movie.
Agreed. I wanted to see, you're totally right. We won't spoil, but the last 5-ish minutes of The Last Voyage of the Demeter Yeah, it's exactly what you said. I'm like, I want to see that movie. That's the one I want to see.
Yeah. So hopefully this does decent enough to greenlight something like that. But if not, I won't be complaining there's no sequel. But I think the sequel is more promising because I think it's going to be more original too. It's not. I'm not sure if that's in any book. That part of it. It's just something maybe they created. I would love to talk to someone that has read that captain's log in that chapter and see, what the major differences are. So if it's different or it's pretty close to it, but hopefully a sequel happens because it teases something pretty cool.
Yeah, I agree. Right now, it's a shame. I was looking at the box office because the box office results did just come in, and this one looks like it's underperforming a bit here, which is too bad. It made 6.5 million domestic is what I'm seeing, coming in 5th at the box office. That means it's coming in behind, of course, Barbie and Oppenheimer, which are number 1 and number 2 respectively at the box office. After 4 weeks out, Barbie's just remaining on top. Oppenheimer's been jumping kind of all around, but it's holding strong now at number 2. And then last week's releases, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Mutant Mayhem, and Meg 2: The Trench are both in above Last Voyage of the Demeter and its opening weekend. So yeah, it's just not looking too good for good old Dracula in the coming weeks, but we'll see. I mean, there's not too much on the horizon. Well, we've got Blue Beetle next week, but that's actually probably going to, I would imagine Blue Beetle might be the one that dethrones Barbie from the number 1 spot. We'll see, but yeah, Demeter not looking good, unfortunately. Maybe needs a blood transfusion of its own.
Drew, what do you give The Last Voyage of Demeter?
I'm gonna be a little nice to it. I mean, I say this is nice. It's not the best, but I'm gonna give it a 2.5 out of 5. Is what I'm going with. A solid 5 out of 10.
Okay, yeah, I give it around a 3 out of 5. It's a really entertaining film. Anything below a 3 for me is close to walkout. For me, out of 5 stars. So that's where I kind of do my rating. But it's a solid flick. It's something if you want something different from Barbie, Oppenheimer, TMNT. You want something maybe a little bit more on the horror side. That's the one to see.
Yeah, for me, I'm putting with like a 5 out of 10 or a 2.5 out of 5 stars. That's like about as middle of the road as it gets. Like this is, again, your mileage may vary. To me, it's middle of the road. It's not horrible. It's not great. Kind of forgettable, but it had good Dracula design. So yeah, that's where I'm at.
There you go. And I think now we just let's go to the fast lane from the high seas, right? With Gran Turismo. Let's just do that right now. We'll just jump right into to one to the other.
Which yeah, and you mentioned earlier this got pushed back a few weeks, and we actually were fortunate enough to be able to see this early for full transparency. So I'm like a little bit far removed from this movie now, but I feel like it's still it feels fresh in my mind though.
It is. And to be honest, it might be fresh because it's kind of cookie cutter a little bit, but this movie was really high on my list of anticipation, but it didn't really completely win me over, unfortunately. That's really where I'm at with this. There's plenty of highs in this film, I will admit. And the thing that happens to this movie is it doesn't really kick into gear until the second half. And I think that's the problem. It's a pretty long movie and it doesn't really kick in until that second part. But a good chunk of the first half is setting up this main character named John. Before it dives into action, it just kind of introduces our main character. And there are some familiar faces in this movie, but the main character, John, is definitely unknown. And I really think this movie would have benefited from a well-known cast. But it seems like the target audience is very more international. And maybe these actors in this movie are well-known internationally, but for me, a lot of new faces. And I will tell you the reason I think this movie will do well is because of David Harbour. Like he is a scene stealer in this film. And with all his charisma, I don't think this movie would have done well without him in it. I mean, and I don't think that's a good sign when David Harbour is the one that kind of saves your movie.
Yeah. I mean, I'm right there with you. I just, where to start? Like it's based on a true story, so that's worth noting. And I think that that's interesting because as you're watching, like the fact that a kid could win, the general premise is there's some of the best Gran Turismo video game players in the world get to compete for the chance to actually race, a real race car. And I think that premise is cool, and especially knowing that it's based on a true story, and the main character it's based on really did parts of this and is a pro racer now. I think it is pretty captivating. But I'm with you. Like, it takes a while to get going. I think the biggest thing for me is the actual racing scenes in the movie kind of fall flat until maybe the last one.
Exactly.
And like, when you have other racing movies in recent memory, like the first thing that comes to mind is Ford versus Ferrari, which is a movie I really liked. And I think the racing scenes in that are extremely captivating.
Even the storytelling. And so that's the thing. When I saw this movie, I was like, it could have learned from the amazing craziness of the Fast saga, like just kind of pull some crazy shots from that franchise. And then just the storytelling and the brilliance of Ford versus Ferrari and some of the cool camera angles they've done in that movie. It just grabbed from those two franchises, which are totally different, or those two films, franchise and film, I guess, and just kind of combine it to deliver something at Gran Turismo. And I think the problem with Gran Turismo, it's like a biopic. It really works as a biopic because also the main character it's based on, who's a real person, he plays also the stunt driver and like kind of the stunt person for that main character when he's driving. So it's really a biopic film, and I think that's the problem. Love that Gran Turismo, the story is real and it's a Gran Turismo story. But when I'm thinking of a PlayStation video game getting adapted, I kind of want to see a little more flair. And this movie really didn't deliver much about that. But I mean, I think this movie is about, or the video game franchise combines the video game culture and the car culture. And I felt like this movie didn't really do that much. We didn't see much of the Gran Turismo video game playing side, really, other than a few montage scenes of him playing the game and being immersed into the track, and then kind of the competition. But even the competition was very short.
There's PlayStation branding all over this movie because the PlayStation logo's on the car and it's in the buildings, and I feel like the PlayStation logo's everywhere, but they didn't capitalize, like you said, on the actual video game nature of it. There's a couple times during races where the camera does a cool fixed perspective behind the car that looks like the view of when you're playing the video game. And when it would do that, I was like, this is really cool. And as soon as they would do it, it would cut to something else. And I would think, no, just stay on here for a minute. Give me this feeling like I'm in control, or like that you could put a video game controller in my hand and it would be like I'm controlling this car. Give me that. But I just feel like some of the editing during these race scenes were just, they'd cut so fast and you couldn't really even see much of what was happening. It's just quick shots of cars moving fast. Okay, they're moving fast, but show me the race and where we're at on the track. And I don't know, I feel like that was the part that let me down the most. And it's, it's worth noting the movie's directed by Neil Blomkamp, who has
delivers great movies, District 9, Chappie, and Elysium. But I was looking at this, he has not released a major film since 2013. He has done other projects, but 2013 was his last major blockbuster.
I remember hearing when he had a horror movie come out like a couple of years ago during the pandemic called Demonic, but that movie got ripped to shreds. Like, I heard nothing but bad things about it, so I never caught that one. But yeah, like a super promising filmmaker a decade ago who had some interesting ideas, and even if not all of the ideas worked, like at least there's a cool visual style or something. This totally feels like, it was time for him to take a studio job and just make like a cookie cutter kind of racing movie. And from that standpoint, like, it's fine. Like, the direction for the most part, it's fine. It's just the racing parts, like I said, I thought were a little underwhelming, which that should be the bread and butter of a Gran Turismo movie. They try to do some fun things, like at the beginning when he is playing the game, the camera pans around him and you see like a car forming around him as if he's driving a car. And for you and me, people who are involved in the video game culture, like playing video games, like I've played Gran Turismo before, and I do understand that that's a very difficult game to play. It is very much a sim. It's not like picking up Mario Kart and playing it. Like, it is hard to guide those cars and do it well.
It would have been a great jab if they had some type of Mario Kart joke in this movie. And that's I feel like it didn't really dive into the video game world and sim racing too much. And going back to the director, I don't feel like he had much creative control on this. There's so much story in this movie, but I actually feel like the story was also glossed over because what it takes place in what, almost a year span, like 7 months or so, maybe. Like this movie, that's how long it takes place. The story it's trying to tell from the beginning to the end, it's like 7 months, it seems like, but you really can't tell. A lot of montage racing scenes and just everything just seems like it's glossed over. And that's why I was like disappointed. I was like, I don't know what's the narrative here. Like they just show multiple races, but not the whole race of anything. It just kind of cuts to it and
And
not really doing good narrating it.
and some of the story tropes are like a little bit tired. Like a part of the main character has a strained relationship with his father, his father's played by Jimon Hansu, who I really like. But the dad's kind of playing the typical like, you need to get out there and do something more with your life and stop playing so much video games. Like, okay, that's something that a dad would have
But
said
once
in the
he's
90s.
gone, they don't like check up on him. I felt like it's like Ash and Pikachu. His mom just lets him go on this journey and forgets about him for months and then checks up on him on one phone call. Are you doing okay? How's your racing going? That's what's so weird about it. Like his family lets him go on this wild situation and opportunity, and they don't question him or have a speech with him or anything. They kind of just let him go. They don't check in. They don't go to his races. Really, like it's just so strange about the family dynamic.
All the relationships are a little bit odd because like you have the weird family dynamic, and then the main character, is it John or Jan or Jan, however you say it, Jan Martinborough, he has a girl that he knew from home that he messages with, and then like she eventually comes out, but that relationship's totally underserved. Like you never care about that at all.
I didn't even think they knew each other. I thought they literally met. That first scene is like the first time they just went to a place and they met each other. There's no, it doesn't seem like they knew each other from before. I thought they literally just met and they just somehow fell in love within seconds. I don't know what their history was prior to that.
And then you've got Orlando Bloom, who I actually, going into this not knowing everything, I mean, I knew that that Jan's kind of the main character, but Orlando Bloom's the first character you really see on screen, and I kind of thought Orlando Bloom was going to be the lead of this movie in a weird way, but he's not really. He kind of sets up the GT Academy, and because he works for Nissan in the film, and he kind of helps set up the competition. And then once that happens, he's pretty sidelined, and he's just occasionally kind of raising his fist on behalf of Nissan in the film on occasion. It's like you said, David Harbour steals the movie, and the relationship between David Harbour's character and Jan is kind of the only relationship in the movie that I feel like really works. And if you didn't have that, then this movie would be extremely unsuccessful. But David Harbour is a great presence. Obviously he's come up from Stranger Things and become a bigger deal, but in any movie that he's in, whether it's Black Widow or this, he just steals the scene whenever he's in it. And thank goodness for him, because his charisma and presence just elevates this movie from what it could have, because he's genuinely funny and very watchable, and I think brings a lot to this movie. And the main actor, Archie Madekwe, I'm probably butchering that, but who plays John, like he's a pretty serviceable, like he's fine as kind of the avatar through which we're watching all of this happen. But yeah, David Harbour is just great. I do think I'll say this about this movie to kind of go more positive. I overall enjoyed watching this movie. Like I wasn't hate watching it or anything. Like I'd say I enjoyed myself. There was just a lot of things to nitpick with the racing. The things that I thought should have been the best were underwhelming. And then the things that surprised me were the things I ended up liking the most, like with Harbour and so on. So yeah, it's like, it's just, Neil Blomkamp's name's attached to it, but it feels like a studio job. And yeah, the things that worked, I wanted to see more of. I wanted to see more of the cool camera views and things. It's just, I don't know. It left me wanting this movie could have been great, and instead it's fine. I think that's where I'm at.
I mean, when you have to rely on David Harbour to kind of carry the film, that's kind of problematic. I mean, he's amazing. I love him, but he's not going to be your lead, especially when that's not even your main character. And when you combine that, the humor is great. And I got to say this, mild spoilers. I'm just gonna say I love the Kenny G stuff in here. The Kenny G stuff was amazing. I will say that as a Kenny G fan. You'll know what I'm talking about when you watch it. The racing scenes just did not do it for me. We've had so many racing movies, and I guess maybe we're spoiled by the crazy stupidness of the Fast saga. But however, with multiple races being showed and multiple tracks, like it would have been cool just to get an overhead of a lot of these tracks, and we don't even get that. There's a lot of cool tracks in this, so we don't get overhead shots of that. There are more, not crashes per se. There's more incidents during these races because there's a lot of laps. There's not that many incidents that we get shown per se. Maybe a few here and there, but like there should be more drama during the races instead of just Jan versus this one kid is really where it was. And I was like, no, there's so many more racers in this. Let's focus on multiple racers at least. That could be problematic for him. But they just did this young kid that was really unbelievable to me, who was always getting pitted against.
I think the only thing that you said recently that I just wanted to push back on, because you talked about David Harbour, and when your movie has to rely on David Harbour, maybe that's a problem. And that's the thing I'm going to push back on is I disagree. I think that David Harbour has a really great presence. I actually think he's a really big pro of Stranger Things. Like I really like him in Stranger Things. I'm not going to get too much into that because that's not what this podcast is about, but like because I do think the Hopper characters had issues in like the last couple seasons and so on and so forth. Like they could utilize him a lot better than what they've been doing. But that being said, I like David Harbour, and even though he's an older guy, he's almost 50 years old, I like his presence. I just don't think he's been making the best choices with the projects he's been doing. Like, was Hellboy the best choice for him a few years ago? Maybe not. And that movie, I remember being like, meh, but he wasn't bad in it necessarily. It just, it was what it was. And, but when he's in some of these side, good supporting parts, like in No Sudden Move and Black Widow, he really thrives. But then like Violent Night and Gran Turismo, is that what you want from David Harbour? I don't know.
You're telling me you didn't like Violent Night?
I have to admit, I have not seen it, but most of my friends that have seen it have been very high on it.
You should probably see that's great. But my whole point is it's Gran Turismo, and David Harbour shouldn't be number one on that, amazing performance list. The movies should be about the cars, the track, and the racing itself, and then Jan as the character, and then David Harbour. Right, but David Harbour goes to the front to the top of that list because to me,
I see what you're saying.
Lackluster. The track footage wasn't that great. Too much montage scenes. The training sessions with all the GTRs in the beginning. Too much of that. And then Jan was great, but the movie is Gran Turismo and not about David Harbour being David Harbour and stealing the movie from everything and everybody. And that's good on his back. That's how great he is. But it's Gran Turismo. That game has been around for decades. It's the racing game for people, and has been around before the Fast Saga stuff. Like this was the interest of video gamers when it came to racing or car enthusiasts. Like this was our game. This was it.
Yeah, it's a good point. When you watch something like Ford versus Ferrari, which, sorry to make the comparison again, but it's just one of the more recent racing movies that has come out. And I feel like these two movies are somewhat in conversation with each other a little bit. Like Ford versus Ferrari, the makers of the car in the title, right? Like, it is about the cars and how the cars are built. And there is a lot about the people driving the cars in those, but like, there's more question about like, is the car going to hold up? And are these things going to work? And Gran Turismo is trying to be a much more human story. And it's more about the person behind the wheel. But that being said, like, it would have been nice to have more of the cars. Like the car could have been a bigger presence. That's the whole point of the game, right? It's a car simulator, and it's all about upgrading your cars and keeping them, with the best accessories and things to better race and getting new cars and better cars. So yeah, the cars really are underserved in this movie, surprisingly.
Yeah, that's the downside of it. But I know a lot of people that do love cars really enjoyed it. And so I'm not trying to be negative on this film because it was really fun and really cool to see. I just don't see how can you make another Gran Turismo movie if it's based on this, like it's a biopic on this one person? Are you going to find someone else to base the movie on and call it Gran Turismo 2? Like, how does this continue? Because it shouldn't have been one and done. If it is one and done, that's really sad. So I'm not sure this was the proper way to go as like a dramatic sports story for Gran Turismo. They could have kind of gone more fictional to build a franchise around it, just like the game as a franchise. So I don't know how you build a franchise around this movie. And so that's why I gave Gran Turismo 3 out of 5 stars.
And I'm gonna give it the same rating. That's what I'd give it, a 3 out of 5. But yeah, it's just, again, this is gonna end up being my shtick for a while, because this is how I feel about a lot of things. Because for me, longer does not always equal better when it comes to movie runtimes. This movie is sitting at like 2 hours and 15 minutes. Again, way too long for what this movie needed to be. Again, you could have cut out 20 minutes here and it probably would have fit together a little bit better. But yeah, I feel like there was a time when having a longer runtime in a movie meant you were getting more bang for your buck at the theater. But from a critical standpoint, I feel like longer does not always equal better, and this one is too long. Just like the last voyage of the Demeter was too long as well. Not that I'm saying every movie needs to be shorter, but it just needs to fit what you're trying to sell me.
I'll tell you, I just watched a 1 hour and 30-minute movie and I loved it. And that is the movie Jules, which I I have that on Nerdtropolis, and I did an interview with Mark Turtletop, who is a director of the movie. He was actually a producer on Little Miss Sunshine, and the reason I'm bringing this up is because it's an hour 30-minute long movie, which is unheard of, to be honest, these days. It's such a short movie, and it works. It's so great. It's such a cute movie. So Jules is about Ben Kingsley's character is an old man dealing with like Alzheimer's, early on Alzheimer's, and a UFO and an alien crash lands in his backyard. It's a Bennett film, so please go watch Jules if you get a chance. I do recommend it. You can go on nerdtropolis.com to watch my interview with Mark Turtletop. We have a great time, and it's a really cool movie. If you want a quick watch, 1 hour, 30 minutes, I'm telling you, this is a great film for that type of runtime.
I saw it showing in Houston. There, it's in theaters around town, depending on which one you look at, and yeah, it looks fun.
Yeah, it's a fun one. And then next up, I think we got Strays, and then hopefully Blue Beetle will take center stage in our next podcast. I think we're going to watch Strays later this week, and so we'll have that. And Blue Beetle, we'll just wait and see what's going on with that one. But also, if you haven't heard any of our previous podcast episodes from the Moviegoer Society, please go check those out. Leave a like, comment, tell us what, you have questions for us. You can leave them for us. And we hope to do more movies, every week. It can be blockbusters or classics. If you've got some ideas for us, we'll definitely jump on it. Also check out the Nerdtropolis Mayor Presents podcast, which is my personal podcast, where I do interviews with actors, producers, directors, just talk about movies. It's a really good time. And that's all on the Nerdtropolis Podcast Network. But Drew, once again, where can people find you?
At Drew Munhausen on Twitter, at Drew Munhausen on Letterboxd, and weekly over at Fresh Out the Podcast. Give it a listen.
Yeah, this was a great time. Doubleheader. We'll see if we do another doubleheader again. But thanks again for joining us for this episode of the Moviegoer Society. And once again, I'm Sean Toshport, the mayor of Nerdtropolis, and we'll see you at the movies.